to the Penny Stamps Distinguished Speaker Series. My name is Christina Hamilton, the series director. Today, we are thrilled to present activist and technologist Chelsea Manning. In a conversation with information artist and biohacker Heather Dewey-Hagborg. Yeah. So a big thank you going out to our partners for today's program for all of their support, as this event today is co-presented with the Institute for Research on Women and Gender, the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, Munger Graduate Residencies, the Dissonance Event Series, with additional support from the Rackham Graduate School, the Knight Wallace Fellows, and the International Institute's Conflict and Peace Initiative. As we have many subjects to address today, many stakeholders involved in our event, in an effort to be comprehensive, we have gone about collecting questions from across the university community, from students and our partners, and all of these questions have been submitted to our fair interviewer, Heather, and she is going to incorporate them and points into her conversation. So today's session may run slightly longer than a typical Stamps talk, but I have no doubt that you will have no idea of that because you'll be so amazed. Just a few announcements before we get started. Best news of all, folks, spring arrives on Tuesday. Yes, noon, 12:15 p.m. to be exact, and the Ann Arbor Film Festival begins that evening. They have an amazing lineup, so check out their schedule, get your tickets, and be here Tuesday night, aafilmfest.org. Then also on Wednesday, the Prison Creative Arts Project will host the annual exhibition of art by Michigan prisoners. This is the largest exhibition of art by incarcerated artists in the country. This is, yeah. Don't miss it. I've got lots of that art hanging on my walls. This is next Wednesday, March 21st, at the Duderstadt Center Gallery on North Campus. It runs till April 4th. Make sure and check it out. There's also tonight at the museum, they're kicking off the Speech and Inclusion, Recognizing Conflict and Building Tools for Engagement. This is a sequence of events that's honoring the history of teach-ins at the University of Michigan. This is an opportunity to explore how to mobilize, engage in activism, and discuss the various issues which are facing our campus. This session will be running this evening now until 10 p.m., so after this event here, you can go over to the museum and join in if you so wish. Please do remember to silence your cell phones. And now for a little background on our guests and the event here today in the series. We find ourselves in this era of post-truth and this cacophony of the 24-hour news cycle and the relentless social media maze. It becomes increasingly difficult to decipher the facts from the story in a world where intermediaries dictate the angles. And I find moments such as this where we can explore and experience things firsthand, person to person, unmediated, and make up our own minds to be essential now. We can see things for ourselves. And we need to be persistent in our efforts to work towards the advancement of humanity through the betterment of our mutual understanding. So I send out a special charge to our art and design students in our midst to tackle the issues with their creative energy, both to illuminate what is and to design solutions of what can be. Today we have two guests who each pose provocative questions that face all of us as a society. First, we have Heather Dewey-Hagborg, who many of you will remember spoke in the series last April. She is a transdisciplinary artist and educator who's interested in art as research and critical practice. Her controversial biopolitical art practice includes the project Stranger Visions, in which she created portrait sculptures from analyses of genetic material. Think hair, cigarette butts, chewing gum. Heather has shown work internationally at events and venues, including the World Economic Forum, Shenzhen Urbanism and Architecture Biennale, the New Museum, the Centre Pompidou, and PS1 MoMA. Heather has a PhD in electronic arts from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. She's a visiting professor of biodesign at Parsons, the New School, and an artist fellow at AI Now, and an affiliate of Data and Society. You see, the perfect person to interview Chelsea. Chelsea Manning, who during her time as an intelligence analyst for the US Department of Defense, she publicly disclosed classified documents that she felt revealed human rights abuses and corruption connected to the US wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. This is a good audience today. Upon being sentenced to 35 years for leaking government documents, she publicly identified as a trans woman and asserted her legal rights to medical therapy. After serving 7 years in military prison, President Barack Obama commuted her sentence. She was released in May 2017. Since then, she's been traveling the country, speaking on the social, technological, and economic ramifications of artificial intelligence and on the practical applications of machine learning. She is an advocate of queer and transgender rights and government transparency. She arrived here yesterday from Austin. She was at South by Southwest, where she spoke, and she also ran into and joined another guest, formerly of the Penny Stamp series, Pussy Riot. She joined them on stage, and she also declared the need for prison reform to add another point of activism to her growing list. Please welcome Heather Dewey-Hagborg and Chelsea Manning.
Hello again.
Hi. It's really wonderful to be here. A year ago, I was sitting here, or standing actually, at the podium at this stage and talking about my art practice, working with strangers' DNA, talking about the problematics of this technique of phenotyping, creating portraits from DNA, and turning that around into an anti-oppressive act by creating a portrait of Chelsea from her DNA while she was in prison. And it's really incredible to be back here almost a year later in the flesh and be able to just sit here and talk about art and technology.
Right? Yeah.
Like it's just totally normal.
Yeah.
It's really wonderful. So I have some images that trace the story of our work together to start out with, which will be very hard for you to see, actually, but that's okay. And then some kind of questions to prompt through that, and let's just see where things go.
Right.
So I thought I would kind of move back in time to the beginning of when we began working together.
Yeah.
Which started in the wake of this project, Stranger Vision. So in 2012 through 13, I did this project where I walked around and collected genetic detritus that strangers left in public, and then examined the genome of these strangers and fashioned it into these 3D printed portraits that were computationally generated. And then over the course of the kind of ensuing couple years, this technology actually became deployed by police, which had nothing to do with me. So my work was showing that this technology was becoming a thing. And then it really became a thing in the world much more quickly than I ever imagined that it would.
Oh, yeah.
And I became really concerned with figuring out how to show the problematics and the reductionism of this tool, this machine learning tool that has these biases and stereotypes like all kind of machine learning systems. And so I was grappling with this, like how do I make this visible? And then I got this email out of the blue. And
yeah, it was from Paper Magazine.
From Paper Magazine. And so Paper asked if I would be interested in creating a DNA portrait of Chelsea Manning. And so I'm just curious to start out with, I mean, for me, this was, I mean, really, I had no sense of that coming whatsoever, and I'm just wondering what was happening on your end.
So yeah, Paper Magazine reached out to us, and they actually asked, hey, can we come to the prison and take a photo of you? And The answer was, of course, no. Like they're not gonna let you like do a photo shoot in a prison. So, and they did ask. I mean, to be fair, they did ask, and they did, you know, they did like consider and moved on, but they said no, of course, which we expected. But yeah, but it was this notion of like there was no other photos of me. You know, there was these photos of me going in and out of the trial. There were these drawings, like artistic drawings, but like nothing like actually foundationally based on an image of me. And this was sort of a hack suggested by, I think it was the editor of that issue of Paper Magazine. And yeah, on our end, it was. I mean, it was like, how do we get my DNA out of the prison? And so I quickly, yep. That's how I ended up doing it. Was I put it into? I was given these mailing labels, and I took that's a piece of. That's a plastic baggie that holds fruit punch packets. And I managed to put some hair clippings in there as well. So I used fingernail clippers to like get a little bit of my hair, which was quite short at the time, and put it into the bag. And I swabbed. I've done plenty of cheek swabs, DNA swabs. So I mean, I did the usual thing on all the sides, and I threw it in the bag, sealed it, and I went to the mail window and I said, "Hey, do you mind if I throw these out, you know, put these in the mail?" And the mail person just scratched their head and said, "Oh." And so I went into the envelope, they sealed it up, and we managed to get it out. So if we had made, you know, it was very lucky that we had a particular person at the mail window that day.
It's very funny also that you mentioned that you've done so many of these cheek swabs before, because one of my concerns, I think one of the first things I wrote to you about was like, what should I do with your DNA?
Yeah, I was like, and I told you, like, I've been in CODIS for a while.
Yes.
I actually submitted my first DNA swab in October 2007. And that was for my security clearance. So, yeah, you volunteer that, and it's permanent if you're doing it for certain security clearance level.
You're like, do whatever with the DNA, just don't send it to me in prison.
Yeah, I didn't want you to send it back. I was like, they'll make us throw away. So I was like, no, don't do that. Yeah.
And so then I took your hair clippings and cheek swabs and extracted the DNA, and went through the same process I went through with Stranger Visions, but we had decided in advance not to look at genetic sex. And this was, for me, I mean, in addition to this opportunity to pay this homage to you, because I really was so inspired by your bravery and courage, it also was this kind of perfect situation to be able to call attention to the reductionism of this tool.
Yeah.
By throwing out the genetic sex parameter and deeming it not worthy of analyzing.
Yeah.
And so instead, to create two portraits.
Yeah.
That would live side by side.
And those are in the magazine, too.
Exactly. So these two original digital renderings were printed alongside the interview in Paper Magazine to begin with. And at first, that was it, right? That was like the end of the project. You know, I'd gotten the DNA, made the portraits, wrote to Chelsea, was really worried about even just sending prints because you'd been getting in trouble for having expired toothpaste
I know, right?
Magazines. And so I was really nervous about sending anything. I didn't want you to get in more trouble. And so I wrote and said, can I send you these pictures? And you're like, yeah, send the pictures. And so I sent these.
Still have them.
What do you think? Oh, that's nice. What did you think when you got them in the mail?
I was shocked at how much. These faces actually do resemble me. You know, and you know, obviously it's an average of the probabilities, kind of averaged out of like what possibility space there is genetically. Mm-hmm. And it's remarkable just how much you can learn about somebody's appearance based on purely their DNA.
It was really incredible also because I wrote to you and sent these, and you wrote back like immediately.
Yeah.
I was blown away. I mean, knowing that you must be getting so much mail, and I mean, just have obviously so much going on, and it was.
I had a system to work through all that mail.
What was your system?
Well, I mean, I used to get these sometimes it depended, depending on what time of year. Summertime, people people don't write, and I think it's really important for anybody that's doing like prison writing work to remember that summertime is very important because everybody's out, everybody's about. It's longer hours of the day, so there's less of an incentive for people to write. So there's actually a lot less mail that gets written to prisoners in the summer, and then towards the holidays, people remember it again. You know, like like because your Thanksgiving, your Halloween, your Christmas and whatnot, like all the holidays bring that back, and also people start being inside and start writing again. But yeah, absolutely. Like I would get these big boxes full of just mail, and it was just like from all over the world. I started to try to collect, like who was sending me mail, but I mean, just like it just became so much. I think in the end, in my entire time in prison, I received somewhere between 250,000 to 300,000 pieces of mail. So in 7 years. So I'm still trying to get the exact numbers from the Department of Defense because they actually tabulated it. But
Wow.
it's a FOIA request, so who knows how long that'll take.
There was this really, really interesting quote. So the name of this piece is Radical Love. And it came from the interview that you did with Paper. And you said in this interview, while you were still in prison, "I don't consider myself a radical. Is it radical to seek justice? Is it radical to be rescued by love? Is it subversive to be sweet? Instead of trying to be radical, I just try to be true to myself. Is it radical to be true to yourself?" And that just totally blew me away and inspired the name of the work, Radical Love. And I just wonder, now that you're free and working so directly in activism and politics out in the world, how this idea of radicality resonates or doesn't with you now.
Yeah. Yeah, so I find that I've talked to you about this, obviously, but I mean, I find the term radical is sort of like it's sort of a label that gets put on some idea or some concept to almost make it seem separate or apart from something that's actually like when you call an idea radical, it's already putting a label on a concept or an idea, and I don't like to do that. So rather than see ideas as being radical or not radical, I mean, like, they're just ideas, and they're fundamental, and they're real. I mean, which is the definition of radical, is something so, like essential, core, like, in math, it's certainly radicals are very fundamental. So, it's just like ideas and concepts should stand on their own. We shouldn't be placing something as being on the radical, because then it becomes an alienating. It becomes both something that separates, that it becomes like less of an umbrella. It becomes more of a separator of ideas. Whenever really many of the things that I believe in, I don't think are radical. I mean, we all have values, and we all have principles, and we all have these ideas. It just seems that in a society like in our society that we're discouraged from like embracing our true values and ideas and concepts and what we actually believe. It's more like what other people might accept, and this acceptability range, the Overton window, if you will, in politics. But I mean, it goes beyond that. It's every different idea. But yeah, that's how I feel about it.
And then the 3D prints premiered in January of 2016 at the World Economic Forum.
Yeah, we managed to get my face. We managed to get my face in prison into the World Economic Forum.
I mean, this was so incredible.
And it was seen by everyone there. I mean, I remember hearing, I can't remember who was telling me, but it was like, Will I Am, saw your
exactly.
saw your face and said that's cool or something like that. So
yeah, that That was really amazing. I mean, just to stress that you had really had your image totally censored.
Yeah, but we uncensored it. And, you know, I mean, it was a hack. I mean, we hacked the system.
Yeah.
Got around it.
So I wonder what your relationship to art was. I mean, what your relationship to art might have been growing up and how that might have changed how you saw art maybe differently through working on this.
I mean, everything's art. And being in prison, I mean, like, I really learned this more so in prison, is like, I can turn anything into artwork, and it has value, and it has beauty, and anything can be beautiful. You just have to look for it. And in a place, you know, like I had this, you know, fairly barren and Spartan cell, and I was policed more than the average inmate. So like some of my friends would like put up posters on their wall, or, you know, put up all kinds of, like, you know, great artwork and things, but I wasn't able to do that, because if I put something up on the wall, like, it would be ripped down. So because I got more intense searches than normal, but I still found beauty in my room, and I still found beauty in the things that people would write to me, and you know, I had this window, and it was like these two tall slits. So it was like this wide, and it was like way taller than I could reach. And it would just like beam this light in sometimes. And, you know, so actually, you know, my cell in Kansas was actually really well lit by the sun during the day. And I could see out, and I could see, you know, the hills and the trees. And there was a barbed wire fence and gravel and, you know, like all the concrete buildings. But I stopped seeing that after a while. And I just started seeing the trees and the clouds and the birds, and I really appreciated the fact that I could stand there and watch, you know, nature, and, you know, the seasons would change, you know, so the leaves would fall off the trees, and it was just like, there's so much beauty around me in a place like this, you know, and being able to appreciate like beauty like that is, I think that is almost an art in and of itself.
What can art offer that's half?
Yeah, because I used to have this classical notion of art, like, oh, it's a painting, so it's art. You know, it's a sculpture, it's art. But no, you can have anything that has symbolism, anything that has value to a human can be interpreted as art.
Or that creates that kind of feeling of the sublime inside of you.
Yeah.
So, then we stayed in touch.
Yeah, we did.
And of course, then also election happened.
Yeah, so in autumn of 2017, or 2016, we launched our time served campaign. And meanwhile, we were working on the comic.
Suppressed images.
Yeah.
And so the comic traced the story of us working together. So Chelsea and I wrote it, and Shirley Kaneko illustrated it. There's a couple frames from that.
Yep, here's me putting my swabs in the back.
And the one on the right, we also blew up into a poster. And that was really my favorite frame from the whole thing, because this was a quote from a letter that Chelsea wrote me, which was like, when I asked about sending the pictures, actually.
Yeah, I was like, just send them anyway. Like, if they get banned,
let the lawyers worry about that.
We'll figure out some way of, you know, administratively challenging it. You know, I mean, I got used to it. I mean, I mean, like, I was well known within the prison for sending complaints through the channels. I mean, and they were correctly cited. I cited the regulation every single time, like specifically paragraph A, subparagraph, 1 of paragraph A, et cetera, and so on and so forth. And I started to memorize it. And yeah, so I was a pain in the ass.
I loved that so much, that you just were, I mean, that obviously this courage that you had, I mean, carried with you, even after being, I mean, at that point already for 5 years, right, or longer in prison, and still you had this like unrelenting optimism that was so really so inspiring.
My optimism does get challenged, and I've had dark moments. It's being able to get through those, and having a community to lean on, and having like real moments of being challenged inside yourself. I mean, I've had many moments like inside my, in my time where I have been challenged, where the biggest challenge is actually dealing with myself and dealing with like the dark, like I can't do this anymore, and I can't get through this, and that's it's kind of funny, like that's where my mantra comes from, like and I use it a lot online. The we got this is that it's actually really more of like it's not so much that it's based on optimism as it is based on trying to motivate yourself to have optimism whenever you can't see the end. Like you can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. And I used to say this in moments whenever, and in 2016, like getting out of prison was just a ridiculous idea. I had a 35-year sentence. The United States government, made this huge big case, very high-profile case. I mean, it was unfathomable to me in that situation to imagine any other possibility, space. Like to just dream about it was like silly almost, but like it was like having that ability to continue to motivate yourself and to motivate others, like people on the phone, and keep working at trying to fight and get out, even despite overwhelming evidence that the contrary is the case.
Yeah, everyone said that it would never happen.
Yeah, I mean, everyone, and it did. So,
Yes.
The thing is that we had to do the work. We had to do the work for the campaign and like put this thing together, even without any genuine belief that that it was a realistic. It wasn't a realistic possibility. But then it became a realistic possibility through our work, which is I still can't believe it. I can't believe I'm sitting here.
I can't believe it either.
And briefly, I just want to say that like like when you're sentenced to 35 years, there's a moment, probably it takes about 3 years, and I've seen it happen in a lot of prisoners as well, like from the outside. There's this moment probably about 3 years in where you just say, I gotta accept this. I'm not getting out of this. No way. And that's comforting. As you have to like be in that situation to like really understand that, okay, I've accepted this. Like this is happening to me, and I need to cope with that. And my goal is survival for the next 30 years, to make it through this and to live the best life that I possibly can while I'm here. And so it was very difficult for me to like, even when it happened. I mean, I remember when I was told like, oh, you've been like, your sentence has been commuted. I mean, I was like, what? No way. I mean, like I couldn't believe it, and even though like I had actual like evidence in front of me, it was very difficult for me. I mean, first off, you're told like, oh, you have 120 days left, and you're like, why not now? That was
Well, what was that about?
I'm not gonna guess.
Yeah.
But so I was multiple feelings that went along with that. But mostly it was very difficult for me to imagine that and to like contemplate this happening. It took me a while.
A lot of people thought that you were free already. I mean, I heard that from so many people all the time that they would be saying, "Oh, now that Chelsea's free," and I would say, "No, she is still there for 5 months."
And I didn't believe it until I actually like physically left, because there was like this fear that, oh my goodness, we lost the paperwork, or it's not going to be or even just I just imagine every possibility under the sun. Some accident happens, the power goes out, some excuse or some incident, that would prevent me, legally, administratively, physically from leaving. And it's tough. I didn't want to ruminate over that stuff, but you do in that situation. So.
And Trump had come into power in the meantime. I mean.
Yeah, but I didn't really see or feel any of that. Mm-hmm. Prison is a very insulated environment. I mean, you see it on TV, but I didn't really watch TV. I mean, I mostly absorbed through like newspapers and letters and magazines, and I had the sense of like what was going on outside, but I hadn't really felt it until I actually got out here, and I didn't realize really. I honestly didn't, because I had been in prison, and prison sucks. Just how bad it is out here now.
Yeah, it's quite bad.
Yeah.
I will say that outside we were all so worried up until the moment that you left.
Yeah.
That Trump or someone would do something.
Yeah.
To try to reverse that.
Yeah. More realistically for us, it was like some logistical problem, some hang up, because it was very difficult to actually. The prison didn't even start doing paperwork to actually acknowledge the fact that I was leaving with a different sentence until 3 days before I left. So they didn't lift a finger until it was May 14th or something. Oh. Yeah. Then they're like, okay, you got to turn in your uniform. It was like, here's the paperwork. Okay, we started the ball moving at that point. Yeah.
So just in case anyone in the audience doesn't know the story of the comic book, just to point out here the amazing thing that happened, that we worked on this. I mean, we put the whole thing together in 2 months, which was crazy because you were in prison, I was in New York, Shirley was in India. It was not trivial working together, and we had a lot of help also from Lisa Ryan, our friend who was helping.
Yeah. She was my direct contact with the outside world. She had a phone that she kept on at all times in case I had to make a phone call through the prison phone, and she would pick it up.
And she worked also so hard on making this happen.
More than anyone else.
And so the last room of the comic, basically, after narrating the collaboration, we envisioned that Obama commutes Chelsea's sentence and that
very
she's
optimistic.
Freed. It was, exactly, and that she's freed
very
in April.
Gutsy, too.
Well, everyone said, oh, that's too far-fetched.
Speculative fiction it was for 3 hours.
Exactly. We published
it
in the morning, and then that afternoon.
Yeah, it was
Obama
announced.
Commuted her sentence. It really felt like this encanting this future that you want to see. This. Obviously there was so much activism and hard work from so many people that made that happen, but it felt like this little bit, like this little magic potion that got sprinkled on top that just, I don't know, catalyzed it. Yeah, and then your first tweet.
Yep. Not great.
Yeah. So then what was the first thing you did?
What was the first thing I did? I hugged my lawyers because they're the ones who showed up. But I actually never hugged my lawyers before because it wasn't allowed in our visitation area. We couldn't physically hold each other or touch each other except for a handshake in the beginning and a handshake at the end.
So you weren't allowed physical contact with anyone the whole
Yeah, pretty much. Or any physical contact beyond like what the prison would authorize under like supervised circumstances.
How did it feel that first day?
I mean, it happened first thing in the morning, so I didn't sleep. I didn't sleep at all that night. I mean, I slept in the afternoon prior, but you know, that was more jittery nerves, like not knowing. And then the first day, I was just like, I was just like on, like, you know, I was handed a phone, like, so it was like, oh, okay, here's a phone, and I'm just like surfing for the first time, like listening to music, I'm downloading music, I'm just like rebuilding like my comfort zone. I mean, I listen, you know, so I just spent some time on iTunes, I guess. You know, it's very basic stuff, like things I just hadn't done in a while, and like just trying to get myself into headspace of, oh, I'm out here now. So this like slow, like transitional period. I was kind of like handheld for a bit, you know, by my lawyers because I didn't have identification. Like it's not like you don't get released out of prison like they're like, hey, here's your driver's license. Oh, by the way, I had no photo ID. I walk out and I'm just left on my own. And the only way that the only way in the end that I was able to like actually do anything was, you know, having my lawyers do something for me, access my bank account, give me cash. So I was kind of stuck for a while.
Yeah, I remember even months later when you were trying to get an apartment, what a challenge that was.
You know, like I didn't exist for 7 years. According, like, you know, credit agencies like assumed that I was committing fraud because my name changed and I hadn't had any activity for 7 years. And it's like, well, I just got out of prison, and they're just like, well, computer says no, so. And you know, it was obvious that like the bank people like knew, like they knew who I was. Like they're like, oh yeah, I know who you are, but like you need to show us, photo ID. It's our policy.
Yeah.
So trying to get photo ID took us a couple months. Trying to get all the paperwork, trying to get me to Maryland, because I was in New York, so I actually needed somebody to drive me to Maryland because I couldn't travel by any other transportation to like get down there and go to the DMV. And I got turned away at the DMV like 2 or 3 times because it's like, well, this paperwork, blah, blah. It was always a problem. So.
I mean, it just makes me think of, how incredibly difficult that is to be suddenly out of
you're
prison.
just thrown out. You're thrown out there, and you know, and then you get this like, you know, in a lot of states you get this like convicted felon, you know, or you know, probation and all these other things, but they don't give you anything, you know. And for people that are on parole or probation, especially people that like, you know, there are people that get the like ankle bracelets. I mean, and they're required to get them, but if they're not free. State doesn't pay for them. It's an incurred cost, you know, that you have to pay for your own for your own transitional period. Now, I didn't have to go through that, thankfully, but you know, a lot of people do, and it's just a bad system.
Yeah, exactly. We'll come back to that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we had to make this exhibition a reality.
Yeah.
So we'd forecast this, Chelsea finally coming and seeing her portraits in person, and then suddenly we had a 1,000-square-foot gallery to fill.
Yeah, but these portraits are the possibility space. Like, you know, beforehand it was with those two, it was the averages, but this is like all the different range of possibilities of who what I could have looked like based on my DNA.
Exactly. The subjectivity of the interpretation of DNA data, but then also all data.
Yeah.
And I think what really spoke to me, so I'm just going to jump to this quote. Yeah, it's a fun video.
I remember him.
So one of the things that inspired the form of this was really the writing that you'd been doing about identity. And this is just one quote, again, even from back then, so from the original paper magazine. And I'll read it so that you can hear it also. So
Yeah.
there's a coalition that's forming. It's the Coalition of Humanity. We've been realizing the existence of structural problems in our society for millennia. It's an incredible leap for humanity to start to break down the automatic factionalism that gender, race, sexuality, and culture have been the basis of. We can see this with all the different vectors that are starting to align with each other in a way that doesn't fit a one-size-fits-all category. I found that so inspiring. And
Doesn't fit in a tweet, though.
no.
My-
But if it's an
my writings are a
artwork,
little bit shorter now.
if you have 1,000 square feet, you know.
Yeah, I had
mean,
more time to write.
Yeah. Because the artwork has this kind of molecular solidarity. And this is like having this solidarity across these identity categories. I guess it's not easy, right? I mean, it's building alliances with people who are of different identities, but also like that identity might be an identity that's your historic oppressor. I don't know. Can you talk maybe a little bit about the importance of building these alliances?
Well, I mean, you know, it boils down to, I mean, I look at the concept of intersectionality, where you have all these different groups of like different identities, different the sort of diaspora of different people in our society and on Earth as a whole, and it's funny because like we all have we all have clashes and issues with institutions of power in particular, and the funny thing is that most of the time, even though the issues might be different and the identity is different, you're clashing with the same institutions and the same structures of power. And you know, if we can, I believe in this notion of having solidarity. Like, okay, like me as a trans person, I don't, I'm not, I'm not dealing with the same issue. I mean, I'm dealing with similar issues in terms of documentation, but I'm not an undocumented immigrant or anything like that. But this notion of like solidarity with somebody who's facing off with the same institutions that decide to categorize who is and who is not worthy. And so like that like connection with different groups of people, I think, and that solidarity, like I can defend, people in their fight against, ICE and the fight against Customs and Border Patrol, just as much as, like I had to deal with, being classed as a particular gender that I'm not and being housed in a prison a certain way. Like these issues are different, but it's the same structures of power. And I think that's kind of the driver there.
And there it is.
Hey!
So on August 5th.
That was in the comic too.
Yeah, exactly. You walk in and there's
There they
30
are.
interpretations of your DNA, and you finally get to see these things in person for the first time.
Yay. My hair was shorter.
Yeah. What did you think when you saw all of these faces staring back at you?
Oh wow, yeah, I was like, whoa. They actually, it was a little. I mean, it was funny. Like I went to take out my phone and I took a picture, and like the like facial recognition in there, like put all the squares on it. I'm like, whoa. It was even deeper.
Yeah.
And I like facial recognition was picking it up as me, and I was like, ooh, that's even weirder.
That's good. So, let's think. So you've been out of prison now for 10 months.
I don't know. I don't count the days. That's a good. Yeah, it's a good question. I know the anniversary's coming up soon. So yeah, about that.
What has been the most difficult part of acclimating to life outside?
I'm a little blind. I'm a little tunnel. I got tunnel vision, I think, in terms of like the issues that I'm really dealing with. Because I thought I was going to get out and enjoy myself and relax and rest, but I just, like I don't feel safe, and I don't feel like my friend, I don't feel like my friends and the people that I care about. I don't feel like we're in a position where we can sit down and say, okay, like I'm out, I'm free, but it's like, no, like it's like I feel caught up in all of this world now, and and I've been talking about this notion of like, I lived in prison for 7 years. I've also been to war, as it was in an occupied country for a year, and now I come out here and like the world, like now we live in this world where it's like we're building a prison, like we're building barbed wire fences and walls around ourselves, and we're creating this like prison world. And I want to be clear that like walls, especially if you're building a border wall, like they're used to keep people in just as much as they are out, which I think is that's a scary thought to be reminded of when I look at history and look at the Berlin Wall, people trying to get out of a place, and it's this notion of like this domestic occupation that we live in now, where the most vulnerable communities in the world, or like in the country, are now like being, like treated, and they're like it's almost like a counterinsurgency effort in our own neighborhoods, and it's really quite disturbing. And I see this, especially, and it was instant. It was as soon as I got out. I'm just like, why is there a van right outside of outside of this neighborhood, where they just got people, like, you've just got cops, and they've got like body armor and AR-15s and shields, and I'm just like, they're just there. And my friend was telling me, like, I was just like, what's this all about? And they're like, it's presence. And I was just like, what? Like,
presence.
Like just like in prison, like we have, like guards, like they're prison guards, and I'm just like, I see this like overlap of like of the prison system, the military system, like the prison industrial complex, the military industrial complex, and all these different systems, and I see like, oh, wow, we've created this like place, and I'm worried about what the conclusion of all this is, because I mean, we have to push back against all this, because I mean, it's just getting worse and worse, and it's been, this didn't pop up out of existence in January or anything like that. This has been going on for decades and decades, a century even, and that it's been difficult for me to try to settle and figure out my own life in a place where I don't feel safe, and I feel like I have a hard time imagining, like people are asking me like, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And I'm like, I don't know. I mean, 5 years ago I was in prison, and I mean, I look at what's happening around me, and I just see more prison. So I don't know. And that's been the hardest part, is and also dealing with like trauma, because I'm struggling to like reflect and absorb like what I've been through. So I'm just running. I'm doing stuff all the time, but I'm also like not like, because I'm in my apartment in the middle of the night, and I'm alone finally, but I just have this like, these like moments where I feel lonely, and like my temptation is to like beat on the wall and say, hey, how's it going? And you can't do that in an apartment complex, of course, but you can in prison. And it was just like little moments like that remind me of just how deeply ingrained this is, because I've spent most of my adult life in prison, so a lot of how I see the world and how I think about things is kind of done with this mindset of, being in an environment like that, and I haven't really adapted to the outside world. Instead, I just, and I don't really know my role or responsibility out here, and I've been kind of thrust out into being a public figure, and navigating that as somebody who, just a year ago, I was navigating like the prison life. It's tough.
In those moments of loneliness, which I think many, if not all of us have, a lot of people reach for social media.
Yeah, I try not to. And I did for a little bit. I mean, I was on social media for a while, but it was a couple times when I got like, when I got sucked into it, and I just had to it was actually my friends would grab me and be like, look, you gotta get off it. Don't look at your mentions. And I'm like, darn, like I've been sitting here for 4 hours just scrolling, and I'm just like, this is addictive. And I actually don't have Twitter on my phone.
Yeah, you were so active on Twitter when you were first.
Well, no, I mean, and I am active on Twitter, but I'm also living more.
Yeah.
I'm like doing more stuff, but I'm also
Very glad
I don't have social media on my phone, which is really helpful for my sanity. Really, it's able to keep me I'm able to keep optimistic, and I'm able to keep myself grounded because I'm not on there all the time. And I have had some moments where I have been on there more than others, and I needed to cool off and take a break.
But I had the impression that also, Twitter in particular played this kind of pivotal role for you.
I mean, I got a hashtag necklace, so.
Right, exactly. So how do these things, maybe you could talk a little bit about the role that Twitter did play for you in.
Well, it wasn't just, it was like social media, because they weren't able to hide me, and I wasn't forgotten. And that was the important thing that I learned in the Time Served campaign was, just despite having it was just like this genesis out of nothing of a campaign. Obviously the work of Lisa and a lot of core activists were the embryo for this campaign, but the fact that it was that after it got to a certain point where it was happening, then it just kept happening. Once we reached that threshold, it was clear that we can, just because you think something's impossible doesn't mean it is. Just because you can't imagine it doesn't mean that it's not something that can really happen. And even now, I can imagine a world without prisons. I can imagine a world without, ICE or a lot of, it's this possibility space. Just because this is the way it's been done, and all the evidence is that it won't work if you do that. Doesn't mean that you can't. And I think that to me is the strongest evidence of that. Is that if we just come together, we can come up with new ideas and new visions and new possibilities, like we did in 2016 with the campaign, and it happened. I didn't believe it would work.
Yeah, exactly. Again, this idea of really incanting this future that we want to see. Let's take this, abolish the prisons.
Yeah.
And say it.
Or something different. This notion of we've created all these institutions and structures and ideas and concepts, but and I do this on Twitter. I just come up with a provocative idea, and I really do mean imagine a world without presidents is what it's pinned on my Twitter page right now.
Yeah.
Because it's hard for people to get outside that possibility space, because we've had this. There was a time whenever we didn't have a president, and there are other ways of doing these things. There's other ideas. There's other ways that we can do these things. We're not stuck, And I feel like school in particular gets you ready for this structured world where everything's continuously happening the same way, and yeah, we have to push back against that, because it's not the case. It's only the case because we believe it is.
And this is also a place where art and fiction have such a potential really to show us what that could look like.
I do have a fear, and I'm gonna mention this real fast. I noticed that there's an awful lot of sci-fi dystopian novels. Stop giving these people ideas, because Yeah, I get the sense that every time we talk about like, oh, this is like 1984. It's like then we create these like it's like imagine, like let's imagine like some more optimistic sci-fi worlds.
Without prisons.
Yeah, because we're already good at imagining dystopian worlds.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I feel like the discourse around the future is so tired. I mean, and so dominated also by this like cis white male European thing, and we really need new voices and different ideas about what the future can be.
I agree there.
Yeah, I want to see that.
I co-sign.
Let's see. Maybe, thinking about the change we want to see. You've spoken quite a bit about your experience of realizing that you were trans.
Yeah.
And the pain that you went through over decades of coming to terms with this and coming out. And it feels now, I think, like we're in a moment where there is a growing global awareness of trans issues, which doesn't mean acceptance and it doesn't mean equality. And I wonder what you think are the kind of political, legal, cultural steps that we need to build a society that is truly supportive of trans individuals.
I mean, first, recognize, we need to get people to recognize that, visibility is not the same thing as equality. And I think there's this idea, this notion that, you're being talked about now, that you have equality now. And it's like, that's not how things ever play out. We were invisible for a while there. And I couldn't even imagine being trans as a teenager. It wasn't a possibility. So I always thought there was something wrong with me or that I wasn't good enough. But this like whole idea of, and also like this notion of like we have to like go to the institutions of power that are causing all these problems to like let us in. I think that's also a problem that I see. Like, and this happened with the gay rights movement of like the mid 2000s of like the, because I was coming through in the 2000s, like everybody was kind of focused on this, but I was skeptical then because it was like, and I support, don't get me wrong, I support, people like be able to get married, but also like this, like I had been homeless in 2006 as a kind of queer, genderqueer, kid in Chicago, and what does marriage equality do for me in that situation? What does it do for any homeless kid? What does it do for any person who is in prison or is dealing with all these, or impoverished or not able to, there's just all these different ways, and we don't want to. I get the sense that like after the marriage equality ruling was handed down in 2015, and I wrote about this, at the time, and I was struck by the fact that I was like the only person who like actually was able to write an op-ed that basically kind of was a little critical of the movement in terms of like we're not done yet. Like don't hang up your. Don't say, oh, we're done now. And that's what happened. I think that the like movement started to feel like everybody was involved in this like movement. Just it started because it was so corporate and it was so lobbyist centric and it was so court based, and so like everybody was giving them giving themselves pats on the back, but it didn't really help the queer and trans community as a whole. It helped, and it only helped gay people in particular. To get, married to one other person, in a situation, and that depends on like where you are. I mean, marriage isn't cheap. It's and it's also a very like legally structured process, and not and a lot of trans people in particular, we always have problems with these systems, like and where do we fit into these boxes? And we just created more boxes, and I'm worried. I'm worried about whenever. I mean, I think that the gay rights movement in the 2000s is a perfect example of how not to to set like your sights on one goal. And it's like, and I'm totally for incrementalism as long as you have an end state in which it is one that really benefits everybody, and that you shouldn't compromise. Like it shouldn't be a compromise to get incrementalism, or it should be like a just we can't keep we have to have that objective. We have to have that clear objective be the goal, and we can't, accept anything else.
So what do you think are the next steps? I mean, what are the next things that we should be pushing for? Are there legal things, or is it more
No, it's
cultural?
more, I mean, there is a cultural thing, I think. It's every so, institutions of power can and do fail. And it's hard for us in this country in particular to believe that, because it's been around for 2 centuries. But the institutions do fail, and sometimes we have to go outside of them and sometimes we have to go around them, and sometimes we have to push back against the institutions themselves. And I think that a movement needs to be inclusive. It needs to be based on solidarity, and I think it needs to be, it needs to have a vision and a goal that goes beyond the systems and the institutions and the visions of the current world that we live in. Like we have to work towards something better, and we do have a movement that we do have movements that have all these things. We just need to support, and we need to be there.
There's quite a bit of interest around your work with technology in the public, and certainly also here at the school. So one of the things that jumped out at me in the New York Times Magazine, the first profile after you were released, they wrote at her first official duty station, Fort Drum in upstate New York, Manning was charged in part with helping to build a digital tool that would automatically track and sort SIG acts from Afghanistan. And so as someone that works with machine learning and data, of course, I was immediately
there's a lot more data than that, though.
What? Tell me more. I mean, I don't know if you can talk about that at all.
I can't.
SIG acts, yeah.
But I can talk about the ideas in general of machine learning and the dangers.
And weaponized for military technology. I mean, how is machine learning weaponized for military technology?
Well, yeah, but it's the same tools. Whenever everybody's talking about algorithms, it's still based on the same notions of Bayesian statistics and I just look at TensorFlow and I look at all the possibility space of algorithms and what they can be used for and how these tools can be built and used, but they're not based on anything. So the same software that you use to predict where the next marketing opportunities are going to be can be used to determine where a target is for a drone strike. It's the same algorithms, it's the same principles, it's the same ideas. And the tool itself is the same. And the databases themselves, in terms of statistical properties, are very much the same. It's just what we label the field names and what we use the tool for that changes. And so I just look at the predictive policing algorithms that are used in New York or Baltimore, and they were based off of the kind of software that we were working with, like the hot spotting of neighborhoods. And the danger that I encountered with hot spotting in Iraq was that it created these feedback loops where there was a lot of activity in an area, and then we would focus a lot of attention on it, and it would just we keep getting more reporting there, and it's just that's because we're there more, and we have more people to generate. This notion of a feedback loop. I was trying to remind the chain of command, if you will, of the fact that what we do is just as much a part of this as the output, and it doesn't churn, and also doesn't churn out an answer. It doesn't mean that, statistically, like it's like a weather report, the statistics, and our statistics were, our accuracy rate wasn't, it was great for the time, but it wasn't that, like we're working with like 30%, like 30% accurate. I mean, that was really good.
Yeah, exactly, and that's totally industry standard.
Yeah, and so I'm just these ideas are dangerous, and the tools are dangerous, and we have people in technology have an ethical responsibility of understanding the consequences of the systems that we use, and not just getting caught up in, we can't just keep getting caught up in deadlines and results. Like constantly, it's about results, results, results. What is the output? What is the results? And what are the metrics of these results? And that's really dangerous. And we need to start thinking like outside of like, what is the consequences of this? What are the social implications? What does this mean when we actually implement this? Because I mean, whenever, we're often guinea pigs. Like I look at social media, like sites and like search algorithms. We're guinea pigs for some gigantic system all the time. And we don't know what the results are going to be and what the consequences are going to be. And we might not find out until the damage is 20 years old.
How can we get engineers to engage with the ethics of this more directly?
We have to talk to each other. We have to communicate with each other. And we can't depend on... I think there's this notion among just people in general as well that, oh, somebody's going to come and fix this. Somebody's going to come and do something about this. And nobody is. And nobody has the incentive to do so. Companies don't have the incentive to do so. The government definitely doesn't have an incentive to fix these problems. So who's going to do it? We have to actually do it ourselves and without guidance. And that's the thing about making ethical choices and decisions is you often work without guidance. You just have to you have to start like thinking more. You have to think deeper.
Yeah, and maybe it's
maybe
it's also seeing the impact of these tools in the real world. I mean, we're going to be at an engineering school together next week, so that's also an opportunity to think more about that, I think. So you've been very involved with activists here in Michigan.
To say the least, I guess.
And
not just, across the country,
Across the country, but
right.
Specifically to kind of bring things local. Activists some of whom were arrested for protesting against Richard Spencer, white supremacist, Nazi, making an appearance at Michigan State University. Can you talk a little bit in your own words about what happened? And
I became aware of the fact that he might be speaking here in Michigan in like late August of last year, and I was ready, and I obviously I know people here in Ann Arbor, so I was ready to show up and be in support again in a protest against somebody like that speaking anywhere. I wanted to show my support and be in solidarity with protesters and people fighting this fight. I'm obviously running across the country, so I'm not always able to show up and be in support all the time. But obviously there was an event in Michigan State in which again, we're dealing with whether or not we should have a platform for somebody who literally advocates for peaceful ethnic cleansing, but there's no debate there. People are facing charges for all kinds of political movements across the country in which we're fighting against people, and as a former prisoner myself, I'm like, I 100% support people, and especially, people who are facing charges. I look at the J20 defendants, they're still facing, there's 59 people still facing felony charges for a protest in 2017, in January 2017. People are facing decades in prison for this stuff. And and now with, which has happened a few weeks ago, people are again facing, felony charges for showing up to a protest and fighting back. And I feel bad because I actually was planning on if I wasn't, because I was at UCLA, so I wasn't able to show up, and come to MSU, but I was planning on being there, but I'm still able to show my support and my solidarity with, the people who are facing, who knows what, in the next few weeks.
It points to this real difficulty that we're, I think, starting to grapple with right now. Maybe I shouldn't
schools
say
aren't dealing with it very well. I can say that.
That's for sure.
I mean, it was funny. I was just at UCLA, and UCLA went with this long caveated speech before I went on, and I'm just like, what's this all about? And it's like, oh well, we had issues with Steve Mnuchin showing up, and it's like, well, think about who you're putting up there. And why, the people aren't just protest. It's not, if you put somebody, these aren't controversial people. These are just really bad people. It's not an edgy debate here.
Yeah.
You're just putting really bad people up there, and it's people aren't going to show up to protest my speech. It's not going to happen. It's not the same thing. You keep trying to treat. And the police presence at UCLA was also it was intimidating. People actually showed up, and and they felt intimidated, and we felt intimidated as people that were there. And but yeah, the schools across the country are viewing it more as a business opportunity, or a way in which they could get press coverage, and a way in which they can, and also and also I think honestly. And I think that some schools want to encourage the conflict so that way they can justify their security budgets. Yes. Yeah.
It does also point to this free speech conundrum, right? That, of course, free speech is something that's very dear, if sometimes unquestioned, in America. But free speech shouldn't necessarily mean free hate speech.
Yeah, free speech has kind of been, it's a weird term right now, to say the least. I don't know, it's one of those terms that has been just twisted and misused and mishandled in so many different ways. Because whenever I've always thought about what the notion of what free speech is, it is the ability to say something as an individual. Doesn't necessarily mean that every single person who has an opinion should have the ability to voice that opinion to the entire world on a stage and be given a microphone and not be protested against. And I think that's where I draw the line. Is people have the ability to say something that I disagree with as an individual, but that doesn't mean that we give a microphone to every single person who has an idea.
Yeah. I want to go to some questions that came from the community here at the University of Michigan. So these are questions from students. So were your politics already formed before you went to prison? Or how did you stay current with and learn about social justice while you were in prison?
We're running a little late, but I'm still me, and I still believe in what I believe, and I still stick to my values. And obviously the world is a changing place, and I'm sort of fitting into that, and I'm trying to speak and be a part of that as much as I can. And it's not easy. It's difficult. But I view these things as being a part of who I am, and I'd be doing this stuff regardless of whether or not I could speak on a stage like this. I would still be doing stuff because I believe in these values. Like I have values and I hold them dearly and I keep fighting and I keep doing stuff. And you know, it's not always going to go right. It's not always going to be perfect. It's not always going to be, you know, and you know, I just hope that I can continue to have the opportunity to you know, be out here and work on these issues. Yeah.
I think we have a few more minutes. I'm looking for my. I think we have a few.
Do whatever you want.
Yeah, exactly. I just want to get to a few more questions from the community here, and I think we have a few minutes for that. So, I mean, they're interesting questions, and they're very diverse questions. So to follow that up, Apple recently moved some iCloud data of Chinese users to data centers in China. What are your thoughts on privacy and human rights challenges related to cloud storage location?
Ooh.
Right?
Yeah, that's a great question. Encryption is important. And you know, and going back a little bit. I mean, there's a lot of danger with data and data storage, especially in all of these different jurisdictions and how they overlap. And you know, there's been all these these talks about agreements and treaties about like reciprocity for information requests and like, you know, warrants and subpoenas, and it's creating this really dangerous and really difficult to navigate world in which, you know, like, you know, Microsoft has a gigantic server farm in Ireland, and so there's a Supreme Court case that's dealing with this issue about whether or not an American warrant, you know, affects a server in Ireland where the data is in Ireland because Microsoft is an American company, you know, and it's this whole notion of like all of our data, and you just have to find you can just start to go jurisdiction hopping, like find the country that is the most friendly, has the most friendly laws to whatever horrible things you're trying to do, and then use those laws to take, you know, the data from somebody. And so I'm very distrustful of cloud services. I don't use any cloud services. As hard as it is to try to do, I turn it off on my iPhone. I mean, I don't use iCloud and I don't use Google Drive. That said, I do use a cloud service that, you know, is more in my control, and it's much more specific. It's much more, but it's a smaller thing. And I'm not saying that that's for everybody. Like, don't try to build your own cloud service, everybody, for each individual. But yeah, it is definitely a very very complex and very difficult world to navigate, and I discourage people from trusting your data with somebody else, and you don't know how to if you don't know how to encrypt, and you don't know how to protect that data, and you know, and even if you think that, you know, you have nothing to hide, and this is a concept that I've encountered a few times, is like you don't know what is bad. Like, you're actually we are bad judges as to what we think we should and should not hide. So I just hide everything. And I encrypt my music.
Well, think about how many ways your data can be interpreted, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, that actually makes me think. I was thinking about this the other day. So there are art collectors now that have these like digital-only collections,
right,
that they have on their iPads, and it's interesting to think about like a limited edition digital work that's stored on a cloud.
Yeah. But, you know, and I want to go back just a little bit about this like, you know, this notion of like having something to hide, because it's very difficult. And I do want to like double down on this. Information, we're very bad judges of like what is and is not valuable information. Now, I've been an analyst, so I know what typically is used to like target a person and is what is actually dangerous. And I like to ask these people. I like to ask people like, hey, you know, what do you feel about this? And like, oh, I don't have anything to hide. And I'm like, can you give me the password to your email? And they're like, no. And I'd be like, why not? I'd be like, because I have personal stuff on there. And I'm like, exactly.
So one more question here. How do we help US citizens become sympathetic and take ownership of human rights abuses and corruption that occurs in communities outside their own? I think that could be interpreted to be US citizens, citizens or not. How do we help people become sympathetic and connect to abuses and corruption occurring in communities outside their own?
Just be out there more, talk to people, learn other ideas. And I've had this problem too, where sometimes I just don't know. I enlisted in the military not knowing. I thought I knew. I thought I was smart. I thought I was intelligent. I thought I read a lot of Middle Eastern history, and I was educated. But I didn't know what was going on there. And I didn't. It took seeing it and feeling it and experiencing it every single day to really have it sink in. And I think that we have to if you don't know, don't say that you know, because I didn't know. I used to say that. I used to say I know. You asked me in 2008 before I deployed to Iraq. I know everything about Iraq. I can name all the cities. I can name the rivers. I can name the towns. I can name the tribes. I can name I even knew the numbers of some of the mahallas in eastern Baghdad. I knew the geography, and I knew the human terrain, and I knew everything. But I didn't know anything. I didn't really know anything. I thought I did because I read it somewhere, and it's not the same thing. Once I was able to connect the dots and be like, oh, there are people here. And I think we really need to be. I think we need to be more ready and willing to absorb the idea and the concept that maybe what people are telling us we can't understand because we haven't experienced it. And I've made that mistake myself, and sometimes I do, but yeah.
Thanks so much for having the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you.